In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing you my Blazing Executioner build, which is a New Game Plus build that focuses on the use of the Crescent Moon Greataxe and the Flaming Strike Ash of War. However, this build can be used much earlier in the game and almost all the way through a regular playthrough as well, so I'll be advising on how to do that in this build as well. So first of all, let's take a look at the Crescent Moon Axe. This axe can be found in Stormveil Castle. It drops from the axe-wielding exiled soldiers there, so it's not too hard to farm. It may take you a little while to get this if you want to get it, but you can get it rather early on in the game, making this a build you can put together pretty quickly. What I really like about the Crescent Moon Axe is its moveset. Its R2 attack is this sort of sweeping horizontal slash with another follow-up horizontal slash. And it's really good at AoEing if you're going to hit like multiple enemies, and just really cool moveset that I really enjoy. And also the running R2 is sort of like a swing around in like 180 degrees that can hit multiple enemies. I really like the moveset of this weapon. It has pretty decent reach, pretty decent damage. The requirements are not too hefty for it at 25 strength and 15 dexterity. Just a really fun weapon. You obviously can use other weapons to do this build, but this is the one that I really like. I also kind of like the look of this axe. It reminds me of an Executioner's axe. Ironically, there is another axe in this game called Executioner's Greataxe that you could use for this build, but I am using this one instead because I like the moveset a lot better. So the Ash of War I decided to go with for this build is Flaming Strike. You can find this in Redmane Castle, dropped from a Teardrop Scarab in the graveyard area in there. And it's not the fastest thing you can get in the game, but it's also not super far. You could probably just run in there and grab it really quick if you want to get it. So that allows you to put this build together fairly quickly. And there are a couple reasons that I went with Flaming Strike with this build. First of all is the fact that Flames of the Redmanes was actually nerfed in patch 1.08. The poise damage was reduced. You can still use it with this build if you want. But because that got nerfed, I wanted to use Flaming Strike, and this is something I haven't used in other builds very much. I used it in the Dragonscale Daimyo build, I think. But other than that, I haven't used it in any other build. And this was actually buffed in 1.07 to add more fire damage to your weapon, for the fire damage to last longer, and for it to be able to use quickly after more other actions have been completed. So it was actually buffed, and then the duration of the flames was actually slightly nerfed in patch 1.08, so the fire doesn't hang around quite as long, allowing for something to run into it after you cast it. But what I really like about this weapon art is it deals decent damage. It's very cheap at 4 FP for just the fire part, and another 10 FP for the follow-up, which isn't hardly any FP at all, especially if you just use the fire part on like trash. And it's got a decent AoE spread, and getting that extra damage buff on your weapon for a longer duration is really nice. And it also hits rather hard, so you can buff your weapon, get damage at the same time, and sometimes just throw out fire when it makes sense to throw out fire for really low amount of FP. And another thing I want to mention is that a lot of people have been commenting that a lot of my builds have a lot of buffs in them, and it's annoying to buff and buff. And I agree that there is sort of a buff meta in this game, and buffs just make your build better, and they're really annoying to do. The same was true in Code Vein. That game had a ton of buffs, but you just became so much stronger from buffing. So I tried to create a build that didn't revolve around buffing as much, and I understand that Flaming Strike does buff your weapon with its thing, but that's really all you need to do, and it does damage at the same time, and you're using it as an attack rather than a buff, really, and you're getting a buff while you're attacking most of the time. So it's not really the same in my opinion. You don't have to do anything else with this build. If you really wanted, and you wanted to min-max as hard as possible, you could probably add something like Flame Gravity Strength to this build to get even more damage, but you absolutely don't need to do it. Now, the armor that you use with this build isn't particularly important as long as you hit at least 51 poise, so you can tank through a regular hit from most enemies while using this weapon, particularly when you're using like the R2s or you're using Flaming Strike. I have the Raging Wolf armor combined with a couple of other pieces to just hit that 51 poise and give me that sort of style that the Raging Wolf has. I like the style of this armor set, but you can use whatever you want, having more poise than that, mixing, matching however you want. The Raptor's Black Feathers is not a bad choice for a chest piece for this build because you do a lot of jump attacks. Getting that extra jump attack damage is nice, but you might have to make up for some of the lack of poise on that armor piece with the armor pieces. So it's really up to you what you want to do here. If you want to min-max, you would probably use that chest piece, but otherwise, just any armor combined that will give you at least 51 poise is ideal. Now for talismans here, I have the Axe Talisman to increase our charged R2 attack. I really like the charged R2 attack with this weapon because of its sweepingness. It takes a long time to wind up, which is another reason we need poise, but this will further boost your damage while doing that. We have the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman to give us more protection. We have pretty decent protection with this build, but this will give you even more, allowing you to tank through hits while you're doing that charged R2 or Flaming Strike. And then you have Shard of Alexander, which increases the damage of Flaming Strike. And you have the Claw Talisman, which increases your jump attack damage. So you do all of these things. You do R2s, charged R2s, jump attacks, and you use your Ash of War a lot. So this build is kind of versatile in the way that it plays, and you're not just relying on one attack. So when it comes to how this build plays, usually on the landscape, I'll just use Flaming Strike's fire portion without even buffing if I just want to get rid of some trash enemies real quick. Or I'll do like a jump attack if it's a single enemy, and that usually wipes them out really, really quickly. And then I'll buff my weapon on more difficult enemies, or if I need to, AoE and then keep swinging, I'll press R2 on the follow-up of Flaming Strike to buff it and get that extra damage. But generally, you don't need to buff with this weapon all the time. It's really only on more difficult enemies. And when you go into a boss fight, you usually want to wait for an opening. I don't like to lead with it unless I know I can absolutely land it. But usually I'll bait a boss into an attack, dodge roll, and then pop out of it and press L2 and then R2 in order to buff my weapon and get that damage. And then I'll try and follow up with some charged R2s when I have another opening, hopefully staggering that boss and then getting a critical strike on them. Again, we don't have any spells for this build, but if you were to add one, I would say Flame Grant Me Strength is a great choice here. It's very low requirement at 15 Faith, and it adds 20% physical fire damage, and you have both of those types here. So you're going to get a 20% damage increase from using that, which is fantastic because I think we hit about 1,000 attack rating buffed with our Flask and Flaming Strike. So that's going to give you about another 200 when you're buffed with those, which is fantastic. And we do have the Fire Infusion set here on this axe, but you could put it to heavy as well if you are fighting like a fire-resistant boss or something like that. Just change it to heavy in order to get more physical damage and reduce some of that fire damage that might get mitigated. When it comes to the attributes that we have for this build, we have 60 Vigor, 26 Mind, 30 Endurance, 66 Strength, 15 Dexterity, 16 Intelligence, 7 Faith, and 9 Arcane. We don't need Intelligence, Faith, or Arcane for this build. I started as an Astrologer, so disregard those. But again, if you want to use Flame Grant Me Strength, like if you started with a class that has some Faith already, that's like 11 Faith or something, putting a few points in Faith to get that will be nice for boss fights. When it comes to Vigor, we have 60 here, and that's really because we don't need a lot of other points for this build. So I've just cranked it up in order to give you a lot more vitality, basically. You can take more hits, you have good protection, you're just going to tank through hits and trade damage. Makes this very, very useful in situations where you trade damage because you just aren't going to die hardly at all. I have 26 Mind here to give me more FP, but this actually might be too high. Flaming Strike is very cost efficient. You don't use very much FP. You hardly need any flasks set up to the FP side of things for this build. So you could probably drop some points there if you want to put them somewhere else. But you don't really need them anywhere else for this build. That's why I have them there, just to make things more cost efficient. We have 30 Endurance in order to allow us to wear heavier armor with better poise while we're using a very heavy weapon and still medium roll. Depending on what your endurance is, you could take this higher to use even more protection armor, which is not a bad idea. I like the fashion of this armor, which is one of the reasons I kept it the way that it is, and matched pieces that look similar to the Raging Wolf set. But if you don't care about that, or maybe there's another set you like more, increasing your endurance in order to medium roll with heavier armor sets is the way to go for sure. I have strength at 66 here, mostly because we're two-handing it, but you will get more damage out of this by increasing it throughout New Game Plus. You get decent damage all the way up to 80 strength, at which point it starts to fall off pretty hard. But because you don't really need a lot of points anywhere else, you might as well just go all the way up to strength throughout New Game Plus. Dexterity 15 is simply there to meet the requirements for the weapon. Because we are using the Fire Infusion, we don't really get a lot of damage out of Dexterity at all, and if you decide to use the Heavy Infusion, you won't get any out of Dexterity. So Dexterity is not a stat you should really be focused on this, but you could theoretically take it up after you run out of strength to keep increasing your damage, but it's not going to be by much. And just a couple final tips before I wrap up this video. If you're using the Flask of Wondrous Physique, you want to use the Flame Shroud and Crack tier in order to increase your fire damage. You do about 50 to 60% fire damage the way we're set up with this build, and obviously Flaming Strike when you cast the fire does fire damage, so that's going to buff that as well, which is great. And you can also use the tier that increases your charged R2 attack if you want in order to boost this depending on how much R2's charged you're doing. I find I do a lot with this build, so it works really well for me. But also using the tier instead of that one that increases your stamina recovery is not a bad choice because you will use a lot of stamina with this build. And when it comes to Great Runes for this build, I recommend using Ricard's Great Rune or using Morgoth's Great Rune. Ricard's Great Rune is going to give you HP when you defeat enemies, and since you tend to trade damage a lot with R2s and charged R2s or using Flaming Strike, this is a good way to help you replenish HP without having to use flasks. And Morgoth's Great Rune just increases your HP. You already have a ton of HP. Getting even more HP is great. You're going to be like a just powerhouse when it comes to health with this build, not dying very easily at all. But when it comes to like Godric's or Radahn's, you don't really need a lot more stats. You only use like 4 stats for this build. So Godric's is not the greatest choice. And Radahn's, you don't really need more FP and stamina, although the HP is nice. So I feel like you'll get more out of those 2 Great Runes. So talking a bit about how to play this build early on, you can obviously rush the Axe and Flaming Strike pretty quickly, or you can use Flame of the Redmanes until you get Flaming Strike, which is even easier to get. But you should be able to get these in the first third of the game, first quarter of the game, no problem, and maybe even sooner than that if you know where to look for them and just rush them and farm them. You should get them real fast. And then in terms of like what stats you're going to go for, you obviously need to get enough strength and dexterity in order to use the weapon two-handed. This isn't very much strength. It's like 18 strength or something like that. It's not hardly any at all. 15 dexterity is not much. And then you're going to increase your endurance to wear heavier armor and obviously get some vigor. So those are your 2 main things. Get the requirements for the weapon. Make sure that you have high enough vigor, and make sure that you have enough endurance to wear like a 51 poise set. And when it comes to talismans, you can get the Axe Talisman very early on in the game in the Mistwood Ruins, so that's a no-brainer to get there. The Claw Talisman is in Stormvale Castle, so you can get both of those really quickly. And when it comes to the Shard of Alexander, I would suggest getting the Warrior's Jar Shard by killing him early on to get 10%, even though it's not as much as Shard of Alexander, just because you'll use it for so much more of the game than by the time you get Shard of Alexander. You won't get that, and you could get someone to drop you Shard of Alexander later once you get further into the game or at that part of the game. If you want to kind of remain true to the game, you could get them to do that for you. You'll just get so much more use out of Warrior's Jar Shard. I feel like by the time you get Shard of Alexander, you're really pretty much done with the game. It's much better for New Game Plus, obviously, but it doesn't play a huge role in New Game. And then obviously you can use any of the Dragon Crest talismans for protection, getting better and better ones as you find them throughout the game. So that wraps up the Blazing Executioner build. I hope you guys have been enjoying these builds that are sort of viable early on in the game, not completely at the beginning, but pretty close to the beginning, through all the way through New Game and then into New Game Plus. I will obviously have other builds that are just New Game Plus as well, because I know people have been asking for those. But I think it's really nice to see builds evolve all the way through the game and be viable into New Game Plus. That's pretty cool to do. And in terms of weapon videos, I think the next one is going to be Greataxes. I know I said I was going to do spears, but I have all the Greataxes now. I made a Greataxe build. I was messing around with them. I really like the Crescent Moon Axe. So the next one will probably most likely be Greataxes. If there are other builds you guys want to see, please leave them in the comments. I do read these, and I do like to make builds you guys are interested in.